Good afternoon. Thank you, Balázs, for introducing me. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to the organizer of this wonderful event. I'm really glad to be here in Budapest. I didn't know your beautiful city, so it's a wonderful occasion for me to be here. And I must say that I'm quite surprised to see all the people here. We are like a mushroom. It's growing step by step. But we are growing, for sure. You are not alone. In every country I go, I can see that this, as I call it, a mushroom, is growing. So it's a very good news. And please talk to your comrades, talk to all the participants and see how you can share your ideas of change, your ideas of adaptation. So today, I wanted to speak about the emancipatory power of collapse. When we think about social collapse, we often imagine catastrophe, abandoned cities, failed states, or suffering population. True, that's absolutely true. But yet, history shows us that something more complex sometimes. When centralized power systems fall apart, they create space for new forms of social organizations, more horizontal, more adaptive, and ultimately more liberating. This is the paradox I want to explore with you today, how collapse can sometimes lead to emancipation. Today's discussion about collapse typically swing between two extremes. On one hand, some people see only breakdown and suffering. On the other hand, what we call techno-optimists believe innovation will always save us. What both miss is a recurring historical pattern. When complex hierarchical systems unravel, they sometimes create opportunities for social reinvention and liberation. My central question is so very simple. Under what condition does collapse become a path to emancipation rather than just destruction? What makes the difference between mere adaptation and genuine transformation? To explore these questions, I will analyze two historical cases. First, sorry, I have this, it's a bit, okay, maybe I put it here. First, Cahokia was the largest pre-Columbian settlement of North America, which transformed dramatically between 1100 and 1350. Second, the communities of Zumia, the people living in the high mountains of southern Asia, who deliberately use collapse-like strategy to avoid state control. This case, through separated by time and geography, show different ways that collapse can lead to new form of social autonomy. Let me first clarify what I mean by collapse and emancipation. By collapse, I don't simply mean the end of a social system, but rather a fundamental transformation. Joseph Tainter, an anthropologist, defined collapse as a rapid simplification of social structures. However, this simplification often is not a reduction in sophistication, but a reorganization from vertical forms to horizontal distributed networks. As for emancipation, I consider both individual and collective dimensions. For individuals, it means increased autonomy and agency, more ability to shape one's own life. Collectively, it means developing social forms that distribute power more equitably. Emancipation is not just about freedom from constraints, but about creating new possibilities. A key distinction in my analysis is between adaptation and transformation. Adaptation make adjustments that preserve a system's fundamental structure or identity, while transformation change the system itself. It helps us understand why some responses to crisis create true emancipatory potential, while others simply preserve existing power relations in slightly modified form. Finally, scale matters, both in time and space. Emancipatory processes unfold across generations. As Hugo said, Roman Empire took like 400 years to collapse. So it's just across generations, not years, and their spatial organization shapes how they develop. Let's turn to our first case, Cahokia, between 1100 and 1350. Cahokia's story begins with dramatic centralization, what archaeologists call the Big Bang in 1050, when a simple village of a few inhabitants transformed into a major urban center with a population reaching between 10,000 to 15,000 inhabitants. This rapid growth contained the seeds of its own dissolution. The intensive agriculture needed to feed the concentrated population forced people to cultivate intensively less desirable lands, which likely led to land degradation. When major Mississippi floods struck around 1150 and 1200, followed by droughts in the mid-13th century, these natural disasters worsened the problem of a system already undermined by its own organization. Building this hierarchical society required breaking with traditional ways of living. The system forced the abandonment of ancestral villages and social life of these communities in favor of population aggregation that created problems of conflict, sanitation, and waste disposal. This spatial reorganization reflected deeper transformation, the shift from a social fabric based on kinship to a centralized political order that needed to break down vertical corporate bonds and replace them with horizontal classes or strata. A fundamental imbalance structured the wall. Here you can see Cahokia city. A fundamental imbalance structured the whole. The benefits of complexity accumulated at the top of the hierarchy in the form of power, control, and security, while the costs were paid at the bottom in the form of increased labor, loss of autonomy, and declined resource base. This contradiction deepened as intermediate hierarchical levels multiplied, which diluted central power while making the system more burdensome. This transformation unfolded in three phases. The first one, the center established a nodal site through the country to maintain control. But these sites ironically became centers of local autonomy. Power diffused downwards and outwards in a movement that center could no longer contain. Second, while central power still maintained the ability to mobilize labor, its actual control over the territory weakened daily. Rural communities developed autonomous forms of organization. This period saw the dismantling of main ceremonial monuments and the displacements of worship places. Third, at the end, towards 1300, the centralized system fully dissolved, but this ending was also a beginning. Communities create new institutions and rituals or realigned existing ones, inventing more flexible and horizontal forms of organization. Perhaps the most surprising transformation during this period occurred in the spiritual domain. Let's see now how it is. So the most surprising transformation during this period occurred in the spiritual domain, and rather than disappearing with the hierarchies that controlled it, the sacred actually became a powerful catalyst for collective emancipation. New ways of relating to the divine emerged, profoundly changing how communities connected to cosmic forces and their own history. This spiritual reinvention first appeared in the transformation of ritual space. The great mortuary, with its monumental ossuary for preserving ancestral remains, gradually gave way to the spirit lodge. Around 1250, the site was given over entirely to ritual use, with the resident population relocating to the rich farming soils in the Spiro hinterlands. Communities marked this change with powerful rituals. The mound capping and the abandonment or termination of medicine lodges via fire, the results of such conflagration being both purifying and transformative. This act of creative destruction physically inscribed a new relationship with the divine on the landscape. Cosmic symbols also evolved significantly. For instance, the Earth, the mother figure, once depicted standing upright in shell engravings, now appeared more stopped, closer to the ground, as you can see in the picture, showing a new relationship with the sacred and with the earth. In this spiritual transformation, ritual objects took on new roles. Engraved shelf gorgets, one reserved for expressing central authority, now circulated among the dispersed communities. These sacred objects, embedded with sanctity and power, displayed in ritual events and curated in sacred places, created new connections, exchanging during marriage between groups of different status. They build unprecedented alliance networks. Their use, previously limited to those with proper knowledge and authority, became more democratic, creating a new web of sacred relationships across the territory. The social life that emerged from this broke radically with the old hierarchical model. Instead of centralized pyramidal structures, flexible networks of mutual aid and solidarity flourished, based on new principle of collective organization. Social houses were the major innovation of this period. These groups transcended all status division and established their legitimacy, not through hierarchical position, but through their ability to create and maintain horizontal connections. They developed what archaeologists call privileged links through a matrix of relationship, including marriage alliance, ritual exchanges, and shared practices. This new social architecture changed even everyday practices. Former markers of social distinction, such as food, for instance, they had a privileged access to certain noble parts of a game, of a deer, or differentiated consumption of terrestrial birds gave way to a more egalitarian sharing. communities developed sophisticated resource pooling systems adapted to local environment conditions and seasonal cycle. At the center of this reorganization emerged interconnected regional webs of communities, of ritual brother or sisterhoods and social house dispersed among several communities, providing flexibility and transformational adjustments for daily challenges. These flexible structures allowed groups to maintain their autonomy while participating in broader networks of exchange and solidarity. As anthropologists observed, king-based groups developed ways of organizing that balance local independence with regional interdependence. Leadership took on an entirely different meaning in these communities. Authority no longer came from position in a vertical hierarchy, but from the ability to facilitate exchanges and maintain balance between groups. The dynamic relationship between communities now involved polity rulers, religious figures, lesser nobles, merchants, farmers, and community leaders in a constant process of negotiation and adjustments. This role flexibility offered unprecedented adaptability while strengthening social bonds. Now, let's turn to our second case study, Zomia, the highland region spanning in southern Asia, as you can see on the map. Here we find a fascinating reversal of our first example, communities that deliberately used strategy resembling collapse to resist state incorporation. As political scientist James Scott explains, the hill peoples of Zomia developed what he calls the art of not being governed. Sophisticated practices designed to maintain autonomy against expanding state powers. So unlike Cahokia, where collapse emerged from the contradictions of centralization, in Zomia, collapse-like strategies were consciously deployed as tools of resistance and freedom. The population of these regions, including the Kampas between Tibet and China, the monastic communities of Litang, or the Bai communities of Xiu, show how diverse groups navigated the complex terrain between empires. These communities developed unique political and cultural practices, particularly strong tradition of local autonomy. Here's the Bai, the Tibetan Bais community, as you can see today. The populations of this region, in Zomia, we observe 4 deliberate strategies that parallel the post-collapse transformation seen in Cahokia. First, voluntary simplification. Communities deliberately maintain certain characteristics, such as oral traditions rather than written records, flexible social structures, and subsistence agriculture that made them difficult to incorporate into state systems. This apparent simplicity was actually a sophisticated strategy for remaining ungovernable. Second, mobility and spatial dispersion. Unlike state society that depend on fixed population in defined territories, Zomian communities maintained the capacity for movement. This mobility served as both a practical response to threats and a structural barrier to state control. Third, fluid social organization. Rather than rigid hierarchies, these communities developed what might be called modular social structures, forms of organization that could be reassembled as circumstances required. Leadership was often contextual and temporary rather than permanently and institutionalized. 4. Cultural resistance. Through deliberative cultivation of distinct cultural practices, linguistic diversity, and alternative historical narratives, these communities maintain identities that resisted absorption in dominant power. These weren't merely symbolic acts, but practical tools for maintaining autonomy. So what insights emerge when we compare these two historical cases? Through separated by time, geography, and intentionality, Cahokia and Zomia reveal complementary aspects of the relationship between collapse and emancipation. The most striking contrast lies in intentionality, as I said. In Cahokia, emancipatory forms emerge largely as an unintended consequences of systemic contradictions, while in Zomia, similar patterns were deliberately cultivated as strategies of resistance. This difference illuminated the spectrums between what we might call emergent and strategic paths to emancipation. Yet, beneath this difference lie remarkable structural similarities. Both cases demonstrate how decentralized, spatially dispersed, and socially flexible organization offer forms of resilience and autonomy unavailable to centralized systems. In both, we see the crucial role of knowledge distribution, whether in democratization of ritual practices in post-Cahokia communities or the deliberate maintenance of oral tradition in Zomia. The spatial dimension proved particularly significant in both contexts. The relationship between concentration and dispersion isn't merely geographic, but profoundly political. As communities spread across the landscape, they become harder to control, monitor, and tax. So what conditions then allow a collapse to become emancipatory rather than destructive? Based on our historical case, I propose 4 key dimensions that shape the emancipatory potential of systemic transformation. The first, structural conditions. Scale emerge as a critical factor. The emancipatory potential appears greatest at the mesoscale. So it means large enough to enable significant social reorganization, but small enough to maintain communal ties. Resources matter too. Both Cahokia and Zomia demonstrate how access to diverse ecological zones provide resilience through environmental challenges. Power structures, particularly their depth and rigidity before collapse, influence the space available for new social forms to emerge. Second, transformation process. Knowledge transmission proved vital. In post-Cahokia communities, ritual knowledge previously monopolized by elites circulated more widely, enabling new spiritual practices. Similarly, in Zomia, the deliberate maintenance of distributed knowledge system prevented concentration of power. Social innovation, the emergence of new organizational forms like the social houses in post-Cahokia societies create the institutional framework for sustaining emancipatory practices. Third, sustainability factors. The emancipatory systems that endure tend to share certain characteristics. They develop adaptive institutions that can evolve without crystallizing into rigid hierarchies. They maintain an ecological base that avoids severe environmental degradation, and they cultivate values that reinforce communal bonds and resist the re-emergence of steep hierarchies. Fourth, the temporal dimension. True emancipatory transformation unfold across generations, rather than months or years. In Cahokia, the process stretched over nearly 2 centuries, allowing for the gradual development of new social forms. As we face multiple cascading crises in our own time, ecological, political, economic, these historical examples offer valuable lessons. They suggest that emancipatory potential in moments of systemic transformation depends not simply on technological solutions or policy interventions, but on profound reorganization of social relationships, knowledge systems, and spatial configuration. So the question of our time becomes not merely how to prevent collapse or adapt to its consequences, but how to shape transformation processes in ways that expand rather than contract the space for human and non-human beings flourishing. This requires attention to the structural conditions that enable emancipation, the cultivation of transformation processes that distribute power and knowledge, and the development of sustainability factors that allow new social forms to endure. In the end, perhaps the most important insight from our historical example is that emancipation is not merely about freedom from constraints, but about the creation of new possibilities, new ways of organizing collectively, relating to each other, and inhabiting our shared world. This creative dimension of collapse may be its most valuable, even often overlooked legacy. Thank you for your attention.